And this week, and for the first time in history really, California appointed an undocumented immigrant to a state post. Lisbeth Mateo is now a member of a state committee that seeks to increase college opportunities for low-income students. The appointment is seen as a slap in the face to the Trump administration, which is calling for increased deportations of undocumented immigrants. Mateo was born in Mexico, and she came to the U.S. when she was 14 with her parents. And the Mueller investigation is taking steps that may have crossed over Mr. Trump's red line. Investigators have begun requiring documents and requesting that these documents concerning Donald Trump's former business dealings with Russia be turned over. Now, Sonam Sheth is a journalist with Business Insider, and she's been closely following this investigation. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So the Mueller investigation is broadening in scope. Has it crossed the line?
It certainly has crossed Donald Trump's red line. Whether it's crossed Mueller's red line is still up for debate. The Department of Justice gave Mueller a pretty broad mandate when he was assigned special counsel, and it gave him the authority to investigate any matters arising from the Russia investigation. Trump's personal finances fall within that scope. So while it might cross the president's red line, it doesn't seem like Mueller has crossed the line as far as his mandate goes.
So what would be crossing the line as far as his mandate goes, just so that we're clear?
For example, if he were to investigate Trump University, that seems like it falls pretty far outside the scope of the investigation. It doesn't really seem like it has anything to do with the Russia investigation as it currently stands. So that would be an example of something that might potentially cross that line.
So do you think President Trump will retaliate now that he's crossed Trump's red line?
That's difficult to say. Trump has definitely demonstrated increased frustration towards the Russia investigation in the last couple of weeks. We saw a couple of months ago, the New York Times reported that Trump actually tried to ask the White House counsel to fire Mueller, but the White House counsel only backed off, but Trump only backed off when the White House counsel threatened to resign. So whether or not Trump will retaliate is still up for debate, but it definitely seems like Mueller is nearing the point where he might infuriate the president to a point where there's no returning from that.
So what about the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner? We understand that there have been some investments made that could put the spotlight on Kushner. Your views on that?
Kushner has been a subject of scrutiny in the investigation for a very long time. It wasn't just based on his personal finances. It was based on, for example, his participation in the infamous June 2016 Trump Tower meeting with two Russian lobbyists who were offering dirt on Hillary Clinton. But as far as Kushner's personal finances go, we've definitely seen over the last couple of weeks, Mueller has been scrutinizing those, especially after it was reported that officials from 4 different countries may have been using Kushner's personal financial interests to influence the White House's platform.
So there are reports that they could have been using his personal financial interest, but is there any evidence of that?
We don't know that yet as the public. We do know that, for example, a company aligned with the Japanese government invested in a Kushner property in Brooklyn 2 months after Kushner joined the White House as senior advisor. And that was definitely out of the ordinary because that company had not taken that step previously. So it raises questions about the timing as far as like why would they wait until after Kushner was senior advisor to invest in that property. So those are definitely some of the questions that Mueller is going to be probing.
Do we know about how much money we're talking about?
That's not clear yet.
That's not clear.
No.
So much is murky right now.
Yes.
Speaking of murky and unknown, you know, our president has a reputation of offering alternative facts, to use that terminology. If he is called to testify and one of these alternative facts slips out, what might the implication be?
Well, if he's testifying in front of a grand jury and he lies, that would be a crime. That's a felony. That is part of the reason why Trump's lawyers have been working so hard to sidestep a Mueller interview over the last couple of months, because it seems like they really believe that if Trump is put in front of Mueller or in front of a grand jury and he makes a misleading statement, which he has a history of doing, then it could really put him in legal jeopardy.
So what about these tweets? Would one of these tweets count, or is it only if he's actually brought into the exact room to actually testify?
The tweets would definitely contribute to Mueller's investigation. For example, back in December, Mueller Michael Flynn, who was the former national security advisor, he pleaded guilty to one count of lying to federal investigators. Trump tweeted on the day after the guilty plea was announced that when he fired Michael Flynn, it was because Flynn had lied to the FBI. So that is something that Mueller would be interested in, because it shows that if Trump knew that Flynn had lied to investigators when he tried to get former FBI Director James Comey to shut down the FBI investigation into Flynn, that could contribute to the obstruction of inquiry investigation.
So much about this is following the money. Is there something else that we should be looking at aside from this money trail?
Follow the money, follow the lies. Those are the two main things.
Follow the money, follow the lies.
Yes.
I like that direction. Okay, so
yeah, and we've seen so far so many of the individuals who have pleaded guilty in the Russia investigation have pleaded guilty to lying to investigators. So as we continue, finding out new details about this probe, it's going to be interesting to see who else has maybe made misleading statements about their conversations with the president, about the circumstances of, for example, Comey's firing, or perhaps what Trump knew or didn't know about the Russian hack of the DNC back in the summer of 2016. So it's follow the money, follow the lies would be the two main things.
So what about this nerve agent? Obviously, the U.S. has come out and has taken a stance, but really, Trump's position has been lukewarm at best. Any blowback from that?
Well, there was a lot of blowback, especially initially, because the UK is the U.S.'s closest international ally. And if there is a chemical attack on their soil, one would expect the U.S. to come out and stand in full support of the UK. That was doubly true after the UK came out and said that it was highly likely Russia was behind the attack. And while the White House put out a statement saying that it stood behind the UK, first it did not name Russia as the perpetrator. Then after being criticized, the White House came out and said, yeah, Russia did this. Multiple US officials came out and said Russia did this, but Trump didn't. So that was something that he got a lot of criticism for, and it seems like it was part of the reason why the US announced sanctions on Russia when it did.
Everyone is talking about what else can be done to Russia, and there are fears that a cyber war could be initiated. We spoke with someone who was in the Obama defense wing, and he is now an expert in this field. I want to play a soundbite from him so that you can listen to this and tell me your thoughts about what could come if nation-states engage in this cyber warfare.
Perfect example is what we're dealing with here in America now with respect to Russian intrusions into the U.S. elections. I mean, I don't think most people really understood the degree to which a nation state could cause that level of disruption. And this is just the beginning of what states could do if they really wanted to unleash a cyber style offensive against another country, from closing down banking to electric grids. There's a whole host of things that states could do.
So as you heard Dwadrick McNeil say, that a cyber war could actually affect the day-to-day lives of all citizens in these nation states, specifically by targeting the businesses, the banking, the electric grid. As a business journalist, cyber warfare, how much of a threat do you believe that is?
I think that that's the next battlefield that the U.S. and Russia will be engaged in. War isn't going to be conducted on a physical battlefield anymore. It's going to be on the informational battlefield. And Russia, we've seen, has been playing by a completely different playbook than the U.S. on this, because they are willing to execute attacks that could shut down critical infrastructure, that could shut down the U.S. power grid, that could really affect the U.S. financial system. The U.S. has not been willing to do that to Russia because the U.S. doesn't operate by that playbook. And so it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But definitely one of the biggest threats that Russia poses as of now is cyber related.
When we look at the Cold War, the big threat were obviously bombs and sort of a nuclear threat. How severe in terms of a disruption of day-to-day life, or dangerous, do you believe that these cyber threats are? Can you paint a picture for me? How dangerous?
Sure, I'll give you an example. Last year there was a breach of U.S. nuclear facilities. And that breach, a lot of people said that it might have been linked to Russian actors. So, for example, if Russian hackers are able to infiltrate the U.S. nuclear facility, it it gives us a pretty good idea of what they can do in the future. Last year, they weren't able to infiltrate any critical infrastructure in that facility, but if the U.S. doesn't up its cyber defenses, if the U.S. doesn't start really engaging with Russia when it comes to, pushing back against their attacks, it could lead to some pretty catastrophic consequences.
Thank you very much for your time and insight. That's a little scary. Sonam Sheth with Business Insider.
Thank you.
Thank you.